Have you ever considered developing the inner fortitude to remain unruffled in the face of criticism, rejection, loss, and even betrayal? Have you dreamed of a moment when the inner pain, the pervasive longing that shadows you even when you appear outwardly calm, would finally subside? Perhaps you're weary of constantly trying to meet expectations, of maintaining an image that demands immense effort, when your sole desire is to be free, if only for a moment, from this burden of invulnerability. But allow me to reveal a truth that perhaps no one has dared to utter aloud. By avoiding pain, you only strengthen its hold over you. By striving for insensitivity, defense, and concealment, you become a hostage to external circumstances, words that cause suffering, actions that bring disappointment, and silence that erodes from within. This is not a sign of weakness, but a reality familiar to most people, though some excel at masking it. Carl Jung, the eminent psychologist, asserted that our essence is defined not by what happens to us, but by the person we choose to become. This is the key to change. This isn't about isolating yourself from the world, becoming indifferent and invulnerable. It's crucial to integrate all aspects within yourself, to bring into the light what currently exerts influence from the shadows. True strength lies not in the absence of pain, but in complete self-awareness, even when experiences cause suffering. If you are reading this, it is not by chance. These lines are for those who are tired of hurting themselves because of the actions and words of others. They are for those who constantly feel emotionally disadvantaged, as if someone holds an incomprehensible power over them. The goal is to show that this can be changed, but it will require facing truths that may be painful, yet perhaps for the first time, bring liberation. It's a common belief that the source of pain lies externally, in the actions of others, in careless words, inexperienced losses, and unexpected betrayals. However, the harsh truth is that none of this can inflict pain unless there is already an open wound within. It's not about the actions of others, but what these events activate within us, in the story we tell ourselves, in an old, unhealed trauma, in the emptiness we try to hide behind a mask of strength, pride, and a desperate need to appear successful. Jung asserted that the pain we experience when encountering the external world is a reflection of what has not yet been integrated into our inner world. This is why some people can maintain clarity of mind while navigating destructive situations, whereas others break down from a simple remark. It's not what happens that matters, but on what ground it lands. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Suffering continues because, at a subconscious level, there remains a belief in the possibility of controlling how the world treats you. There's a persistent desire to be good enough, smart enough, strong enough, and understanding enough, as if this could guarantee protection from pain. But control is merely an illusion, and as long as you cling to it, you live in constant tension, trying to predict the unpredictable and avoid the inevitable. Do you want to be free from suffering? Then stop defending yourself against it. You don't need more control, but more awareness. As long as you believe that others must change for you to stop experiencing pain, you remain enslaved by their actions. Freedom begins the moment you realize that everything that comes from outside only has power when it resonates within. This is where the real battle unfolds, in the unconscious. What is hidden from sight, incomprehensible, and uncontrollable governs you. This is precisely what needs to be explored further. Prepare for a deeper dive, for that is where true transformation begins. A common misconception instilled in people is the illusion of complete control over their own lives. However, the reality is that most people live as if on autopilot, unaware of the reasons for their reactions, not understanding the origins of their feelings, and making decisions that they later sabotage themselves. As Carl Jung astutely observed, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is precisely what happens to many. Pain emerging seemingly from nowhere, anger flaring up without apparent reason, and sadness washing over without cause. All of these are not random occurrences. These are signals emanating from those corners of the personality that have been forgotten, ignored, or suppressed. Jung called this hidden realm the unconscious, emphasizing that it's not merely a nebulous cloud of thoughts, but a powerful force, an entire system of memories, traumas, desires, and fears that a person avoids confronting. These very factors continue to shape their feelings and actions. Why do certain words or situations have such a destructive impact on one person, while others remain indifferent to them? The answer lies in the fact that these words touch sensitive points within that are still painfully active. And they remain so because a person hasn't found the courage to face them, but has merely swept them under the psychological rug, constantly tripping over them now. Jung asserted that change is impossible without acceptance, and condemnation only oppresses. Yet, what do most people do? They condemn themselves, suppress their feelings, force themselves into silence, believing this will solve the problem. However, the unconscious doesn't disappear when ignored. It merely finds more sophisticated ways to manifest. In destructive relationships that repeat over and over, in self-sabotaging patterns that are impossible to break, in anxieties and fears that arise when everything seems to be going well. This isn't just bad luck. It's the unconscious attempting to awaken a person who stubbornly continues to sleep. To become invulnerable to external pain, one must stop running from their inner world. Until a person knows they're unconscious, they will remain a puppet of their emotions, and the more intensely they try to protect themselves from external pain, the more vulnerable they become to internal pain. However, there is a way out. Not through defense, but through integration. True invulnerability is not an act of resistance, but an act of deep self-knowledge. Many mistakenly believe that the only way to avoid pain is to close themselves off from the world, erect walls, wear masks, develop emotional armor, and pretend that nothing affects them. They declare, "I don't care. It doesn't concern me. Nothing bothers me." But inside they continue to bleed and crumble. The problem lies not in the feelings themselves, but in not knowing what one truly feels and why. This only happens to those who have not yet come to know themselves. Jung was right when he said, "Know all the theories, master all the techniques, but when you touch a human soul, be just another human soul." And this human soul, which a person stubbornly hides behind an image of being strong, invulnerable, and in control of everything, desperately cries out to be seen and heard. Achieving emotional resilience is not about building an icy fortress around oneself, but rather the art of integrating and accepting all aspects of one's inner world. It's not an escape from pain or a denial of conflicts, but a courageous dive into the depths of one's soul to illuminate what has long been buried in darkness. True invulnerability is born not from creating barriers between oneself and the world, but from the realization that nothing external can shake what has already been accepted and become part of the inner self. By integrating one's shadow aspects, fears, flaws, and insecurities, a person gains the ability not to react impulsively, but to consciously observe and choose their path. They cease to be a puppet of their own emotions, gaining true freedom. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the path of becoming who one truly is. It's not about conforming to external expectations or imposed ideas of what one should be to gain approval, but about unlocking potential that arises from the harmonious union of light and shadow, ego and the unconscious. Jung emphasized that individuation is not a pursuit of perfection, but a process of holistic integration. One doesn't need to become a perfect person. It's enough to become whole. The paradox is that the more desperately a person runs from pain, the more persistently it pursues them. The more intensely they try to avoid vulnerability, the more fragile they become. However, when a person bravely faces their wounds, accepting themselves in all their multifaceted nature, with strengths and weaknesses, nobility and shameful aspects, nothing external can break them. This path requires courage, the courage to look within, to shed imposed masks, and to allow oneself to feel. It is precisely in pain that the key to transformation and the acquisition of true strength lies hidden. From childhood, people are taught to hate pain, instilled with the belief that suffering is a sign of weakness, tears are a waste of time, and excessive sensitivity makes one vulnerable. As a result, many begin to run from pain, avoid it, and deny it. However, the more intensely a person tries to escape suffering, the more persistently it pursues them, taking on various forms. Pain can masquerade as anxiety, anger, apathy, boredom, or self-destructive impulses, the reasons for which are sometimes difficult to comprehend. Ignored pain does not disappear without a trace. It carves tunnels in the depths of the subconscious until, at some point, a collapse occurs. Carl Jung held a completely different view on the nature of suffering. He believed that pain is a messenger of the soul, a signal from the unconscious, a language through which the self, a person's true I in its entirety, tries to attract attention. Jung famously said that depression is like a lady in black. If she appears, don't push her away. It's better to invite her to sit down, offer her a cup of coffee, and listen carefully to what she wants to say. However, most people prefer not to listen, forcing themselves into silence, distracting themselves with external matters, occupying themselves with anything, or simply becoming numb. They do everything possible to avoid looking at what is truly important. But what is this pain trying to show? The truth is that suffering causes such intense pain only because a person is still at war with themselves. One part of them strives for growth and development, while another desperately tries to keep everything as it is. Within a person, there is something that desperately yearns for transformation, but their ego, accustomed to control, tries to stifle this call. It is precisely in this internal conflict that pain is born, for any change is painful, and growth is always accompanied by discomfort. Letting go of outdated beliefs, severing toxic connections, allowing what no longer serves to die. All of these are forms of grieving, an internal process of death and rebirth. It is precisely in this chaos that something fundamentally new is born. When familiar structures crumble, when certainty vanishes, and pain exposes vulnerability, a person gets a chance to see their true self, without masks, without defense mechanisms, and without imposed roles. At this moment, suffering acquires a sacred meaning, forcing one to be humbled by the only force capable of liberation, their own self. Carl Jung deeply understood this, viewing suffering not as a system error, but as an integral part of the process of personality development. Pain is not a dead end, but the beginning of the path to individuation. However, most people cannot withstand this trial, preferring flight, distraction, or a return to their comfort zone. But if you, the reader, have reached this point, it means you are ready for the transition. Ahead lies an understanding of this process, a realization of how the path of individuation, despite its seeming loneliness and harshness, leads to liberation. Only a few possess enough courage to embark on the path of individuation, and even fewer are capable of seeing it through to the end. This path promises neither ease nor comfort. It offers no guarantees and does not protect the ego. On the contrary, it shatters it. Jung defined individuation as the process of becoming who you truly are, which entails relinquishing previous notions of oneself. This process can be more painful than any external rejection, as a person realizes the illusory nature of much of what defined their identity. A person is not their achievements, not their past traumas, and not an image created for universal adoration. All of this was merely a way to survive. However, survival is not a full life, and individuation is a call to live beyond mere survival, when the unconscious pushes to the surface everything that has been suppressed, hidden, and distorted. Jung wrote, "Individuation requires the dissolution of the persona, for it is merely a mask of collective convenience." In other words, one must shed old skin to see what lies beneath. It is in this process that a person gains true invulnerability, not because nothing affects them anymore, but because they have passed through fire. They have met their fears face to face, looked shame, need, and anger in the eye, and said, "I see you, and you no longer hold power over me." This inner clarity and transparency before one's own darkness grants a strength that is independent of approval, recognition, or control. There is no longer a need to please everyone, win every argument, or appear strong, because a person knows who they are, and no one can take that away. True emotional armor is not an outer shell, but an inner core, the integration of all parts of the personality into a center of consciousness that remains unshaken in the face of life's storms. A person may experience pain, but it will not break them. They may be wounded, but they will not lose themselves, because they have ceased to be reactive and have found wholeness. They have stopped living on the surface and begun to dwell in the depths. However, this depth comes at a price: loneliness. Not because a person will be left alone, but because few will be able to accompany them on this journey. Most remain trapped on the surface, hiding behind masks and fearing their own feelings. And when a person begins to free themselves, they inevitably drift away from them. But this drifting away is not rejection, but a sign of maturity. A person distances themselves not out of pride, but because they no longer fit into the environment where they once hid. This leads to the final stage of the journey, the realization of consciousness as a shield. It is not strength that protects, but clarity. Consciousness is the only state in which nothing holds power over a person. It's crucial to realize no external circumstances can shield a person from suffering until they turn their gaze inward and become aware of what is happening within their inner world. Words will cause pain, failures will wound, and losses will plunge one into despair until an awakening occurs. However, awakening is not a magical transformation, but a daily choice that requires the courage to look deep within, even when it causes pain. It is accepting responsibility for one's feelings, without shifting blame onto other people, the past, or fate. As Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you embrace transforms." Throughout life, a person may resist the fear of not being good enough, the feeling of emptiness due to rejection, the pain of loneliness, and the longing from feeling unnoticed. But how do they usually act in such situations? They hide, stay silent, try to control everything around them, strive for perfection, and try to appear strong. All of this leads them to a state of exhaustion and weariness from fighting with the world and themselves. However, they now understand that true emotional immunity lies not in hardness, but in clarity. It's not about creating armor, but about expanding one's awareness. When a person understands their triggers, behavioral patterns, and emotional wounds, the actions of other people lose their power and can no longer destroy them. They still feel but do not drown in their emotions. They still suffer but do not lose themselves. And this fundamentally changes everything. Protection becomes not an escape from life, but a deep immersion into it. Those who float on the surface suffer from every wave, while those who dive into the depths find silence, stability, and strength. That is where a person is heading. And when they begin to live from a state of integration, presence, and acceptance, the world may try to knock them down, but it will no longer find vulnerable spots. If this text has resonated with you and something within you has awakened, it's important to remember, true transformation only begins when you don't stop at the first step.